Okay, I think those numbers have slowed down now, so I will get going. If I could have the first slide, please, Courtney. Okay, so this is what we're up to today. This is your welcome. And then I'm going to introduce the panel that we have with us today. They are going to talk you through this subject. We've got a great panel and they've got some different perspectives on here, so a lot to learn. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. So please do put in your questions. We're very happy to answer them. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just explain a little bit more about how this particular webinar works. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's a Q&A function. Please write your questions in there. You can also upvote any questions that you particularly like the look of. So if someone's asked a question that you would really like answered, you can use that as well. So you'll see there's also a chat function. That is there if you want information or tech support. Also, if we mention any guidance, any MSc guidance, what we'll do is we'll put the link in that chat section for you so that you can click on it and have a look at it later. So we are recording this webinar and we will make it available on the MSc YouTube channel. So if you have colleagues that you think would like to listen to it at a later date, they can do that on our YouTube channel. Next slide. So as I say, we've got a great panel today. I'm Claire Owen and I'm from the Medical Schools Council and I'm chairing today, but we have Mandy Hampshire from the University of Nottingham, Gordon Dent from the University of Keele, and Tim Paget from the University of Sunderland. So a real range of universities and I know a very experienced panel for you today. So with that, I think I am going to hand over to Mandy. And we're just going to bring up that presentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for the introduction. So just while we're getting the slides up, I'm Mandy Hampshire and I'm Director of Admissions at the University of Nottingham. And the things that I'm saying would be general across medical schools. They're not specific to the University of Nottingham. And although we're talking primarily about students who don't have an offer, they might not have an offer now, but they may have an offer at a later stage in the cycle. So I think some of the things that we'll be saying would be relevant when they get an offer a bit later on, potentially as well. I'm very aware there are a number of situations that students can be in and that medical schools are at different stages in the offer making process. And I think Gordon's going to give a medical school perspective about why this can be and where we're at and what that means for students. So I'm aware that students may not have had an interview and been rejected or made an alternative course offer. So they might not have been accepted for medicine, but perhaps they've been made an offer for a different course at the university that the university thinks might be relevant to them. And in that situation, they may need advice as to whether to accept that alternative course offer or not. And really, I think that depends on whether the alternative course offer is something that they might be interested in and would enjoy doing, because this is their life at university and, you know, might be 3 or 4 years and very important for them wherever they're going to be and whatever they're going to be studying. And also thinking about their future plans, how much they want to study medicine, whether graduate entry might be an option for them. So that's an important situation for them to be in and where they may need advice about what to do with regarding that alternative course offer. I think I'll also touch on that when I come to talking about waiting lists and other options later on as well. So they may not have had an interview, but not have had a decision yet. So some universities will send out rejection decisions quite early in the cycle, and others maybe will wait. Maybe they're working through the decisions at interview. Hopefully, I would think most medical schools have done most of their interviews by now. But they may be considering holding additional interview days depending on what sort of response they've had. And so they may not have issued a decision yet, and it may still be possible for candidates who have not been rejected or received an alternative course offer but are kind of waiting to still be invited to interview, but it would be definitely worth them contacting the university to find out, because I am aware that students can miss emails or they can go into their junk email folders, and they may have had a communication that they're not aware of, so it is worth them checking. And most universities will have a very excellent and inquiries team. I know we do at the University of Nottingham. So they might have had an interview and then have been rejected or received an alternative offer. So again, that's a place of them considering, do they have other offers for medicine? Do they not have any offers yet for medicine? And should they accept that alternative course offer? And that really depends on whether they do have other medicine offers and been successful in other medicine interviews, or whether they have no offers, and also what they're thinking about in terms of their careers and future options. So they may have had an interview but had no decision yet, and that's not a rejection. That doesn't mean they're going to be rejected, but perhaps the medical school hasn't made their offers yet, or hasn't made all their offers yet. And so I would say that's still a hopeful position for them to be in, and it is a matter of waiting. There used to be a UCAS decision deadline at the end of March, but that's been extended, and the deadlines are not what they used to be pre-COVID, and some universities I know will wait and may not make their offers for quite some time yet. And I'd say each university has a different process and a different way of working, and ways of working and timelines can vary year on year, so you can't necessarily go on what happened last year. So, and then for some people, they'll be in the fortunate position of having had an interview and been made an offer. And then they've obviously got some time to be thinking about what to do. If they've already had an offer, then the UCAS deadline for making decisions is the 6th of June, if they've received all of their offer decisions by that point. So can I have the next slide, please? So we often get questions about waiting lists, and some students and some teachers and careers advisors are more aware of this than others. I think some medical schools have run what are known as waiting lists for a number of years, and for others, they've begun to do so more recently since COVID and government, the years when we've had government type restrictions on the offer making process. And I think now many medical schools do run what's known as a waiting list. It might not be a list as such, so it may not be possible to, and probably the inquiries teams would not want you or your students contacting them saying, where am I on the waiting list? And then contacting again and saying, where am I on the waiting list? Because there may not be an actual list, and also where students are in that can vary greatly, and they could be, if they are given a position, that could change very rapidly because it's live data and it's dependent on UCAS decisions. I think really a more accurate, perhaps, summary of the situation is that there may be students, as I've explained, who have been interviewed and may have been rejected, or may have been just waiting for an offer and not had a decision. And the universities may be watching what's happening with the offers they have made, seeing what the response is, and may well make an offer, in the coming weeks or months to those students. And so the students may have had an interview, may not have had a decision, and may be waiting, or they may have had an interview and been rejected or given an alternative course offer, but been advised by the university that with a permission to contact them if at some future point an offer might become available or a place might become available. And as universities, we're advised that we shouldn't contact our applicants unless we have their permission. And so it's important, if they want to be considered for a place, at some future point, that they do respond to that and give permission to be contacted, and that they keep those contact details up to date so they can be contacted in the future. And also, as I've said, there may be some students who haven't been interviewed, may have been rejected, but may have also received a communication saying, are you happy to be contacted if we decide to run some further interviews at a later date this year? And so again, if that's something they might be interested in, particularly if they've not got any other offers, then it's important that they notify the university that they are interested and would like to be contacted, and to maintain those contact details. So can I have the next slide, please? I think it's really important not to lose sight of the fact that the most important thing for the students is to do as well as they can in their A-levels, because whether or not they have an offer now or might have an offer at some later point this cycle, or whether they're going to apply again next year, those A-level results are going to be really important for them. And so I know it's nerve-wracking, and they'll be desperately wondering, are they going to get an offer or not, or be upset if they've been rejected. Trying to support the students and help them to focus on their study and their revision and doing as best as they can in their exams is really important. If they have some unexpected event or illness, then it's important for you to support them in terms of notifying exam boards, so that that can potentially be taken into consideration with the exam grades that are awarded, and to do that, the students will need your support with doing that. And may need independent evidence of whatever's happened. And it's also worth asking the university if the student's holding an offer with them, if they have an extenuating circumstances policy where unexpected events might be taken into consideration. That would hopefully be on the website, but I know university websites can be a minefield. So again, contacting the university's inquiries team to ask about that would be helpful. And I think it's important to support students through that process, because if they have had something unexpected happen, they or their parents may not be in a position to be thinking about that. And so your support is really important. And then really, once their A-levels are done, they should be able to relax and make the most of the summer. That's important for them all. It's a really important break after their studies. But in the midst of that, it is good for them to be contactable and to check that their phone numbers and contact details are correct. So if it's going to be after they've left school, their school email accounts may not be working, so maybe they need to change their email on UCAS. And if they're going to be out of the country doing something exotic in some faraway place, having a nominated contact, whether that's a parent or someone at school on UCAS, can also be very helpful. Can I have the next slide? Thanks. So as I mentioned earlier, a key date in the UCAS timeline for students who have received all of their offered decisions by May, I think it's the 16th of May, but I can check that. Then the offer holder decision deadline is the 6th of June. So students need to make decisions about whatever offers they've been made, whether they're medicine or other offers, by then. And I've noticed that a lot of them leave it quite late, and we're watching as the offers come in, and some of them can leave it really quite late before that date. And I'm not sure whether that's because they're being advised to by schools, or whether that's part of their kind of, if they're teenagers, they're kind of, kind of last minute, not necessarily planning ahead. I'm not sure. We might be interested in your comments on that. Some students are more fortunate than others, and some will have offers, and some may have more than one offer. And then your advice about how they choose firm insurance is important, and thinking about where they want to study, the offer grades that they've been given, and what their likely achievement will be at A-levels will be important. So if they've got more than 2 medicine offers, then they're going to have to make a choice and reject some. They're going to have to choose their firm insurance. And if they don't have any medicine offers, then it will be thinking about those alternative offers they've been given, or their 5th choice offer. So hopefully they will have some offers. And then thinking about, well, do they accept those offers or not? And that is not necessarily straightforward, because some of the UCAS rules about, for example, going into extra and going into clearing, or being contacted by universities who maybe have spaces at a future date, are reliant on the student not holding an offer. And that doesn't mean not holding a medicine offer, that means not holding an offer at all. So I think that is something that does need to be discussed with the students, and they need some advice and guidance on that is as informative and helpful for them as possible in their individual situations. And hopefully you will know them and know their, as much as possible, their likely outcomes with A-levels and what would be in their best interests. So can I have the next slide, please? And then some of them who maybe haven't got offers now will have offers, and they may need your support with thinking about things like accommodation, applying for student finance, applying for bursaries and scholarships at universities. And all of the offers for medicine will be conditional on occupational health and DBS applications. So they may have their academic grades, but they will still be, or they may achieve them on A-level results day, but it's important to be mindful that those offers are dependent on occupational health and DBS, and students and you to be aware of that as well. If students have a disability or a long-term health condition, please do encourage them to contact the universities as early as possible. Certainly when they've got a firm, definitely when they've got a firm offer, because we want to be able to discuss support plans with them and put appropriate adjustments in place. And that I know many students and maybe others who are supporting them are fearful that that might undermine their position or disadvantage them in terms of their offer, but it definitely should not do. And please do encourage them to contact us and to be planning ahead so that they can succeed when they arrive on the course. Okay, next slide. So most of what happens on A-level results, they're going to be covered by the other speakers, but in terms of offers, whether or not the student has achieved their offer or been made an offer by the university will be on their UCAS track, and they may receive that offer even if they haven't achieved their offer grades. So they may assume that they've got their grades when actually they haven't, and maybe they're going to be coming into school or awaiting a school communication to tell them what their grades are. But we will have already made near-miss decisions, and we will put those decisions onto UCAS, so they will be there for them on A-level results morning. And they may see a decision from their firm or their insurance offer hold university, depending on whether or not they've got their grades for their firm, or if they've missed those grades, but they've got the grades for the insurance offer that they've been given. So the decision will be there for them early on A-level results day. If they've got no offer decision on UCAS on A-level results day, then obviously when they come to you or when you're communicating with them, you should know and they should know the grades that they've achieved. There might be a few where you're waiting on grades with some exam boards. That's a rare event, but can happen. And really do check if they've achieved their grades, because things can go wrong in the system. And if they have achieved their grades and there isn't a decision on UCAS, then please do support them by contacting the university to find out what's happened. And if they haven't achieved their grades for any and they're not near with the grades they have got for any of the UK medical schools, then that's where they're going to really need your advice about what to do next. And so I'm going to hand over to our next speakers, who are going to cover some of the other issues that will be helpful for you and for them.
So I believe, Gordon, it's you next.
Yeah, that's fine.
Are you sharing your slides?
I've got an echo. I'm just going to plug my headset in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mandy. That was really informative and very helpful. I think it's a useful time of year to get a reminder about some of these things as well. Gordon.
Okay, can you hear me? There's an echo now.
Yes. And your slides are coming up, so that's brilliant.
Okay, thank you. Right, so following on from what Mandy told you, she said I was going to give you a view of the timeline from the medical school's point of view. These first two slides are a bit of overkill. It's really to explain to you why different medical schools take different amounts of time to make decisions. It can be frustrating for your students at this time of year when they've got 3 of their decisions and they're still waiting for one, and they can't work out why that would be. And it may be that one of the places they've been interviewed is still interviewing and can't make a final decision on them yet. And so clearly everybody's putting in their applications by the same deadline. We can't really make any decisions unless somebody is clearly ineligible until we've got the UCAT results, and we get those mid-November. So for medical schools that have automated processes for checking GCSE grades and then effectively just rely on UCAT for selecting for interview, they can get through that process very quickly. So they'll start sending interview invitations in November. Some will have done all their interviews by the middle of December. If a medical school is reading personal statements, which is fairly rare, but 1 or 2 do it, including Keele, then clearly it's going to take longer for everything to be processed, because somebody has to physically read all of the forms, and that's going to take several weeks or months. But they will be making decisions as they go along. I'll come back in a moment to how they do that. So things tend to speed up in December, that a lot of medical schools in December are sending out interview invitations either for December or for January. Many will already be interviewing in December, and as I said, some will have finished interviewing during December. And clearly places that have done most or all of their interviews will be sending out offers at that point. Ones that have just started interviewing may be sending offers to people with very high scores, or they may hold off making any offers. During January to February, those who aren't very UCAT focused and streamlined with their interviewing will still be interviewing. Most will be sending offers out at this point, unless they're in a position of wanting to do all of their interviews before they send out offers. March, most places have finished interviewing. Some will still be, so Keele are always still interviewing in March because we're still, or have just finished scoring all the personal statements. Many will have sent all of their offers. Some will still be sending offers. As I say, some will be waiting until they've done all their interviews before they send out offers. Occasionally, some medical schools will go into April with interviews. Either this will be because they're lagging because of the amount of processing they've needed to do, or they may just be interviewing non-standard applicants. So they may be doing a lot of international applicants here, or people with unconventional educational histories who they've taken some time to work out whether they're eligible to be interviewed or not. Now, at this point, when offers have gone out, students who are being put on reserve lists should have been informed or been invited to join reserve lists. Now, different medical schools operate reserve lists in different ways, and it is a little bit tricky to navigate this. But if they haven't heard anything in April, then it's not very likely they're going to have a positive decision at that point, unless you know that they're still interviewing. And sometimes we will make rejections later than we make offers, because we're trying to work out exactly how many people we want on the reserve list, make sure we've got enough candidates who may be approachable at results time. You go on to the next slide. Right, so some medical schools may use UCAS Extra to bring in additional students for interview who didn't apply to that medical school at the first deadline in October. When you get into the position of having students using Extra or clearing, you do need to be aware that they mustn't be holding any offers. So if they are approached with the prospect of applying through Extra, they will need to give up fifth choices that they're holding offers for. Now, something we sometimes get asked about is how we can be making offers to some applicants when there are others who we haven't even read the personal statements of yet. And this is based on floating thresholds, that we will invite people for interview who have high rankings early on while we're still assessing other applicants, because we know the ones we've applied will be above the final threshold for interview, regardless of what happens with the subsequent scoring. Similarly, if we're making offers to people after interview at a very early stage in the interviewing process, it will be because their scores are so high that we know they'll be above the final threshold again. We are very careful about this. There is not going to be a position where we run out of places. We will never have made so many offers that we can't make offers to better qualified applicants who we haven't interviewed yet. So what this will generally result in is a fairly slow rate of offers being made through the first half or 2/3 of the interviewing process. And then later on, when we're more confident about where the final job will be, those offers may come out more rapidly. Okay, next one. So the potential positions students could be in at the end of the interviewing process is they may have made applications to medical schools, not been invited for interview at any of them. the approach to this is generally fairly straightforward. They need to think carefully, is medicine what I want to do? So I've got my strategy wrong this year. I've applied to the wrong medical schools, ones where I'm not competitive and I'm not going to get shortlisted for interview. So they need to review their strategy, think about where they're going to apply the following year to give themselves a better chance of getting an interview. If the reason they haven't got any interviews is because they're applying to places whose UCAT cutoffs are much higher than their score, then they need to think about where they're applying, but also about whether they can improve their UCAT score. They read it the next in the coming summer. You can have people who've had interviews but haven't been made any offers. So here they're going to need to think about what did they do in the interview that resulted in them not being made offers. So did they feel unprepared in some way for the interview? Do they need more experience of talking to people in that kind of situation? Were there questions they just couldn't answer because they didn't have relevant experiences or they didn't have the understanding they needed? So they can think about what they can do to prepare themselves better for the following year. Again, there may be options in extra, there may be options in clearing for new applications. You can't guarantee these will exist, and there's never going to be an awful lot of certainty about your likelihood to succeed in them. The more difficult position to be in is whether or not you have offers not getting the required grades. So either not meeting the conditions of an offer or not having the grades that would allow you to apply with a 2 grades the following year. Now, as Mandy said, some people, even though they've missed the conditions of their offer, will still be taken because they're close enough to think it's a realistic prospect for them to succeed. They may be offered an alternative course where they have to make a decision on whether or not to accept it. But then there are other things they would need to think about if they're not in that position about what they'll do in response to not having the required grades. If we go on to the next slide. One of these options may be to try to get places through clearing. Now, there is an awful lot of uncertainty around this. There's a wide variety of practice. Most medical schools will use clearing in some way, but not openly. They won't have places available for new applications through clearing. To manage our reserve lists, usually the most legitimate way of doing that is to use the clearing process, but we do it without opening clearing up to new applicants. Some medical schools will sometimes accept new applications through clearing, but if they do, there are likely to be strings attached. First of all, they're likely to require the applicants either to have met their UCAT requirement the previous summer or to have already done it during the current summer and meet that requirement. The universities are in quite a strong position if they're going into clearing. They don't need to drop grade requirements for taking people through clearing. There will be plenty of applicants who meet the requirements. If you've got somebody who's missed grades, clearing isn't likely to be a realistic option. If you've got people who didn't have offers and have got good grades, then it's possible that they will be able to get places through clearing. And nowhere is going to take anyone onto a medicine course without interviewing them. So interviews, if they're done for clearing, are pretty frenetic. You will be given very short notice of an interview, and usually you'll be given a very, very short time to make a decision on whether to accept a place if you're offered one. Some places might use either extra or clearing to bring through applicants who they didn't interview first time around and do some additional interviews. When you've got results and you're looking at whether clearing needs to be an option, do check on university web pages first, because if they explicitly say there are no places for medicine available in clearing, there are no places available. And it's not worth spending ages trying to get through to them on the phone to ask, are there places in clearing, if you're just going to be told no. You could have spent that time more productively looking elsewhere. Now, a couple of things we get asked a lot around results time are, I haven't made the conditions of my offer. Can you take me onto the foundation year instead? The answer to which is almost always no. Foundation years for medicine, with a couple of exceptions, are all widening participation routes. You have to meet very strict eligibility criteria to be eligible for them. They're not a backdoor for people who are standard applicants and haven't met the grade requirements for an offer. People ask about joining other courses and transferring onto medicine. Again, in most cases, this is not possible. There are very few medicine courses. The number's increasing a little bit, but it's still a low number that will allow you to start another course and then transfer onto medicine. And you mustn't assume that you would be able to do this. Even the medical schools that will allow transfer or allow you to do the first year of another degree, and if you perform well, go into year one of medicine following that, they don't have fixed numbers of places. So whether you can transfer will depend on how many places are available to transfer into and how many other people are applying for it. So it is a very, very risky approach to take. Okay, next one. So you may have people then who need to think about, are they going to need to reapply? So if in a position of needing to reapply because they didn't have interviews or they didn't have offers, this is generally fairly straightforward. They just need to apply more strategically the next year and make sure they're better prepared for interviews. If they've missed grades, reapplying is much less straightforward. There are some medical schools that will not consider A-level results from resits. Some will make allowance for extenuating circumstances, others won't. There are some, including Keele, that won't allow you to apply in the third year of A-level study. We will accept resits, but not while you're resitting them. So this would force 2 gap years. And the places that you can apply while resitting aren't necessarily the places where you would be a strong applicant. So Sheffield, for example, are very open to accepting applications from people who are resitting A-levels, but you have to have a very high UCAT score to be able to get an interview at Sheffield. So you do need to look really carefully at where you would be able to apply and how much chance you have of making a successful application there. Bear in mind, if you start another university course, you may well not be allowed to apply for medicine while you're on that course. So we would say explicitly, if you're already on another university course, unless you're going to graduate from it in this academic year, we will not consider an application from you. If you start another course, you should do it with the intention to complete. So you then have to think, is it worth starting another degree and completing it with the intention of applying for medicine as a graduate at the end of that programme? And Tim's going to talk a little bit more about this. But you do need to bear in mind that nearly all medicine courses that will look at graduate applicants will have a minimum A-level requirement or require an additional aptitude test from people applying as graduates. There is a bit of a myth around among applicants, parents, and to some extent teachers that your most recent qualification supersedes all the previous ones. So if you have good A-levels, then it doesn't matter what your GCSEs were like. If you have a good degree, it doesn't matter what your A-levels are like. That is absolutely not true. So even graduate applicants may have GCSE requirements they need to meet. And however good your degree is, if you've got poor A-level results, you may not be able to apply to many medical schools. There may be others where you need to do a different test. But there's also, if you apply for entry as a graduate, there's no guarantee you'll be successful. So the degree you do first with the intention of applying for medicine afterwards must be something that will be useful to you if you don't succeed in getting into medicine at the next attempt. You need to have a backup plan. So don't just do biomedical sciences, for example, because it's got the word medical in it. Look at what your other options would be if a graduate application for medicine doesn't come off, and look for a degree that is going to prepare you for that. Make sure your students do consider that there are thousands of useful and rewarding careers apart from medicine, and they do need to be thinking about what other options are open to them, because not thinking about anything other than medicine is not a positive thing. It doesn't show you're passionate, it shows you're obsessed. It doesn't show that you are ideally suitable for medicine, it just shows you're inflexible and imaginative and not very bright. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful, Gordon. That was characteristically comprehensive. Really, really good advice there. Tim, you are up next.
I had changed these slides slightly, but actually I'm going to talk through this because actually you've had some really useful information from both Mandy and Gordon, and I'm kind of going to talk a bit about the what ifs bit, and it's the bit where essentially, you know, your students haven't achieved the grades, they've got no place, and they haven't achieved the grades and missed by a reasonable amount. It's what can you do? And I think at this point, as advisors and teachers, it's really asking your students the questions, and it is asking those questions around. For me, it is, you know, is medicine the right choice? So for you to have that discussion with them, is medicine the right choice for you? And what are the reasons for going into medicine rather than anything else? There are a wide variety of health professions out there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. The reason I'm going to include those today is just to give you that element of background, but also I think some knowledge, because you will ultimately be directing many of these students into professions maybe they hadn't really thought about. And I think it's really important that they, Gordon mentioned this, and Mandy did as well, about backup plans. Students do need to have backup plans. If they don't get into medicine, what happens then? You know, it is crucial that they do think about those issues around, you know, if I have to go via the degree route, what degree do I choose? And I'll be talking about a whole series of professions, most of which linked in with degrees, and the sort of pros and cons around those. So, you know, clearly they've understood, hopefully, that, you know, the question is, they want to do medicine for the right reasons, and they're committed to do medicine, but they can't get in this year. And if they've missed a grade significantly, as Gordon said, that becomes more difficult to then reapply. So they've got a really good understanding of the profession. The next question, though, is, have they looked at other professions? And many students won't have done that. As Gordon has said, a lot of them will basically say, my backup plan is biomedical science. And of course, thinking about biomedical science, that takes them into a different ball game. So biomedical science usually is a 3-year course. And of course, if they choose a biomedical science course that is not accredited, that means as a degree, it's a standalone degree, which allows them some flexibility, but not as much as it would be as an accredited degree. And I'll talk a little bit about that next. So it's crucial that you yourselves have some information around that. So the next series of slides are around other professions. And I have to say, this first one is one that I don't know hugely about. We don't run physician associate courses at our university in Sunderland. We run most of others, but not this one. But physician associate is something that's become much more, and I know Gordon and Mandy may jump in at this, but it's a profession and an area that's become much more significant in the past few years. Maybe 10 years ago, this was something that was relatively unheard of, and now it's started to become more significant. And this essentially is a postgraduate only route. So why am I telling you about this? Well, again, it may well be that your student has not kind of got to that point, and maybe the decision making around them choosing medicine is something that isn't so clear to you and possibly to them. So it's saying to your students, actually, there are alternative professions out there that may be better suited for you. So physician associate could be one of those. It's essentially you take a bioscience first degree, you then do a postgraduate course which leads you into this physician associate area. Again, like many of these degrees and professions that are allied to medicine, there is a body that regulates this particular group. So what do physician associates do? Why is it different to a doctor? They do work under supervision, and they do many of the things that doctors do. So essentially, it is one of those professions. I'm just looking sideways because I can't see the whole of the screen. It is one of those professions where you do many of the tasks that a doctor does, again under significant supervision, and again it's an area where currently a lot of these physician associates work in general practice, primary care, internal medicine, and also emergency medicine. So thinking about advising your students, so that applicant who has applied for medicine, hasn't made the grades, doesn't have offers, really thinks that they're cut off, then there are alternative approaches. And at the end of this, I will come back and talk about graduate routes, which Gordon mentioned. So next slide, please. Kerry, thank you. So biomedical science is this thing, Gordon mentioned it, and it's one of those courses that everybody knows about in many ways. But the biomedical science route into the profession is slightly different. So a biomedical science degree is common through many universities. I think a large proportion of universities run a biomedical science or related degree. However, it can lead into a profession on its own, and that profession of a biomedical scientist is actually a useful profession in terms of the health process. So these guys work in hospitals, they work in laboratories. Typically the entrance is through a first degree, although there are apprenticeship routes into this, but it's via first degree. And you typically do a 3-year degree followed by 1 year placement in an accredited laboratory where you gain the training, which gives you your registration with the Healthcare and Professions Council, the HCPC. So you have to complete this portfolio of experience and use that to then gain registration. So again, if you're talking to your students, it's the question, do I need to do biomedical science? Is that my fallback degree? If so, is it something I'm thinking about to go into the profession, or is it something I'm thinking about solely as a graduate route back into medicine? And you have to, and they have to understand that difference in many ways. So if I wanted to become a registered biomedical scientist, advantages for that, again, if I'm still thinking about doing medicine, this is a longer period. It's a 4-year period because you'll do 3-year degree plus 1 year working in a laboratory. It does give you something as a graduate that is actually quite useful, and that's work. Work in biomedical science laboratories is something that could be fitted in potentially around your medical course. And I will come back to that in terms of funding and finance a little bit later on. So there's biomedical science. Most of you probably know about that anyway. Next slide, Courtney, thank you. Obviously, nursing and midwifery are those other areas that are really important in terms of the health professions. This may be something well away from your students' thought processes and may actually be well away from what they want to do. But again, it's thinking about all of those different aspects of nursing and midwifery. Again, these are very specific to a profession. So this is something you would go down and follow through to the end in most cases. You wouldn't take a nursing degree and not become a nurse. But again, it's thinking about those questions you've got to ask your students at that start. Is medicine what they want to do? And what are the reasons for doing it? If those reasons are sound, as I said, then this probably isn't for them, because ultimately they will always want to get back into medicine. And that's one of the problems you have. I've been involved in, and many of us have, on other programs teaching pharmacy, not so much teaching nursing, but teaching biomedical science. And a lot of students that enter these courses actually want to do medicine. And in some ways, they're not always very well invested in them. Nursing slightly different. I think you have to be invested in nursing to do it effectively and to do that. But as a career, there are a whole series of routes you can go down in terms of the nursing approach, adult being the biggest, adult nursing being the largest by number, but there's mental health, midwifery, and community. So it is one of those professions that allows a student to look at a whole variety of outputs in terms of where they end up, and that's quite significant. Next slide, Courtney. Pharmacist. So this is another route that many people take. Nursing less so. Biomedical science, yes, is often the go-to degree. But some students will go from medicine to pharmacy. Now, pharmacy is a 4-year course, and that in itself is significant, because if you start a pharmacy course, currently you will find it's a 4-year course. There is an additional year registration, but that may well change in the future, because it's likely that these 1-year pre-registrations are going to be incorporated into the degree itself. So you will become a registered pharmacist in a somewhat shorter period of time. Pharmacy, again, is a profession on its own. As you know, it covers a whole range of things: community, hospital, and I say a pharmacist associated or attached to GPs. Slightly different in terms of they're not community pharmacists. They're typically associated with the GP and are linked to patients. Community pharmacists really do a lot of community health and patient support for a wider range of individuals. But there's also the industrial pharmacist, and that's a big part of pharmacy as well. So why I mentioned pharmacy again, a lot of medical students do end up going into pharmacy. And one of the things about that is it is that choice of degree. It's a hard degree, the same as medicine. It's something where your students have to be invested in to make sure they're going to be effective at it. And I think if a student takes a 4-year degree or a degree that clearly has a professional output like nursing and pharmacy, they must be invested in it. So for them and for you, it's that process of getting them to make decisions around ultimately what their final career choice is. And that can be quite tricky at this age. As you know, I'm sure you realize this. And particularly at that point of A-level results time, it's a very difficult transition for them to make to go from one to the other. I think a couple of things about this. Again, a lot of students will start pharmacy courses and look to transfer back into medicine. Gordon made that point very strongly, very clearly. It's very difficult and unlikely that you'll be able to transfer from many courses into medicine unless there is a linked course to the particular university you're trying to get into. And even as Gordon said very nicely, there are very few places involved in that transfer. So very few students actually transfer over. And I think one of the things I'd always tell you to remind your students about is ask those questions of the university, how many students actually do transfer over between courses. But we often get asked, particularly as we have pharmacy here, I know they do it at Nottingham and Keele. Again, we often get asked in terms of pharmacy, can I transfer over at the end of my first year pharmacy? And the answer is no, sadly. So I think there is a decision point post A-level, and that decision point is medicine clearly my career path, career choice? The other thing to think about and direct the students is it, do you think and do they think actually they've got the capacity to do medicine? If they realize at that point maybe that's not the choice, then these professional type courses are available and open to them. And pharmacy is a good route that they can take, as well as biomedical science. They lead to professions, and those professions are crucial in terms of health management and the overall NHS of the in the UK. Next slide, please. Connie, thanks. I want to throw in allied health professions. There's a whole variety of these as well, and these cover a wide range of topics. Again, these are professionally focused, so you will do a degree with these and you'll end up in a career path associated with those. What I'm saying in this slide really for you is actually there's a lot more out there than just biomedical sciences, nursing and pharmacy. There's a lot more that your students potentially could get involved in, podiatry, therapy, diagnostic radiographers. There's a whole variety of routes that they can go into, each of which has its own professional progression process in the health service, but also again has its own function very specifically within that as well. Next slide, please, Connie. So let's flip back a bit. So you're advising your students at a really difficult time. It's very difficult to have these conversations with them often because they're quite upset they might not have made it into medicine, which is where they've always wanted to be. But it's that thing about peeling away from that decision making. Is medicine what you really want to do? Do you think you can really do it? Is that something? And again, you know, the medical career process is a long process. Are they in there for the long haul? If they're in there for the long haul, and actually you think and they think that medicine's for them, and possibly, you know, the A-level examinations haven't gone quite as well as you would have expected, and they've not performed as quite as well as they might have wanted, and there could be a whole variety of reasons for that, as Mandy's mentioned, and Gordon as well previously. Possibly graduate entry into medicine is the route to go, and I think that's a useful route for many applicants. So there are two major routes. There's a 4-year accelerated program, and there are a small number of, well, there's a significant number actually of universities that run these accelerated routes. The MSc website gives them information about that. But most medical schools will also have graduate entry into their 5-year course. And I think nearly all of the medicals do that. Medical schools do that. Typically, you'll need a 2-1 in a degree. Some universities specify the type of degree to take, and worth take is. Some universities are more open about the kind of course you take, but traditionally you would do a biomedical, I'm using that term in its broader sense, degree, and that can include things like genetics, human biology, often things like that that have a biomedical bent to them. And you also have an A-level requirement. Gordon laid this out already. Remember that if you're going via the graduate route, all medical schools that take graduates in will look not only at the degree classification, they'll look at the A-level requirements, and they'll also look at the GCSEs. That's part of that process of really understanding what this applicant's like and what they're about. So it's important, again, that they meet those thresholds. And I say to everybody, and I think you as well, is getting your students to be thinking about this. If I'm going to go via the graduate route, make sure that I actually am set already for potentially what might be my target universities when I reapply back into medicine. So have I got the right GCSEs? Tick. Have I got the right A-level grades? If I haven't got the right A-level grades, there is a way out, and some GCSEs as well, using GAMSAT. So GAMSAT is a sort of graduate test that many schools utilize to either boost or to give additional information around your competence and knowledge in particular sciences, but it can also be used if you haven't taken the right sciences or sciences at all. You can use GAMSAT then to assess your knowledge around sciences that would be appropriate to get into medical school. So the key thing about this graduate route is an alternative for somebody who really you feel can do medicine, is focused on medicine, and medicine is what they want to do. Next slide, please, Connie. Thanks. One of the biggest drawbacks to the graduate entry, and everybody knows, I think, here on this call, is finance. And I've got a few slides around finance. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but the key thing to remind your students is that, and again, you're thinking, why am I talking to these students when this is going to be 3-4 years down the line from this point now? I think if students are thinking about graduate entry into medicine, they have to be aware that there will be a cost to them, particularly if they go into the more traditional 5-year medical school routes. Typically, a student won't be able to get payment for their fees. So they'll have to pay for their own fees for the first 4 years. And they will be eligible for some maintenance costs. But again, that's somewhat limited. It's only in the 5th year where they will start to get additional finance. So if they're thinking about a graduate route for a traditional 5-year course, they've got to be aware that there will be a cost associated with that. And if they start that course not understanding that or not being prepared for that, that puts them at a significant disadvantage. And I'm sure both Mandy and Gordon have students who are on the 5-year course who work, and many of those do it very effectively. Actually, they're very, very effective. But those are students that you can tell they've thought about this very carefully. Okay, and I've got some comments from one of our 4th years who's a graduate, and she's one of the kind of people will succeed. So over adversity, she came for a graduate route because she had originally applied for medicine, and she had illness during her A-levels, didn't quite make the grades. And she made a conscious decision at that point to go via the graduate route. And I'll talk a little bit about what she said, but that's really, really useful. Next slide, please, Courtney. So there is the alternative route, which is the 4-year accelerated. And I should say there are significantly fewer of these places around. I should also mention the 5-year courses. Many universities do. When you're looking at graduates as part of their whole cohort, particularly small cohorts like us, Sunderland, but other universities as well, will often look at the proportion of graduates in the course, in that cohort. So although we don't have specific limits on the 5-year course in terms of numbers of graduates, we do often look at that in terms of how well that balances out the cohort. But there are these 4-year accelerated routes for graduates. And again, finance for these is different, and you'll be able to look at these slides later on, but the finance for those is somewhat different. There is more finance available for many of these students, or more that they can apply for, particularly all the way through the course, which is quite significant. Next slide, please, Courtney. Just to be aware, and again, I know we're talking mostly well, currently it's people in England, but there are variations across the piece in terms of the different areas. So Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have slightly different approaches to funding, not massively, but slightly. But it's important again that your students are planning and are aware of these differences. Now, of course, one of the problems with funding differences is that the funding environment will change, and that will probably change in the next 5 to 6 years. But this is where we currently are. So they must be planning based on the fact that I'm doing a degree, I want to be a graduate entrance into medicine, then I must know probably what my finances are going to look like. So, next slide, please, Courtney. So this is from one of our graduates, Emma, and she gave me some really useful things to pass on to you, to pass on to your students. The graduate route, often people think, yes, it's additional time. I've got to say, you know, when you're 18, 3 additional years isn't going to make a huge amount of difference to you. In terms of a career, the medical career is long, as is the training part of that process. It's not just the degree, it's the foundation, it's a specialist training, and then it's going on ultimately to training your specialty towards that. So 3 additional years isn't a huge amount of time. So and I asked Emma for the pros and cons about what she chose to do, and what she said was the pros are around the greater confidence. She's 3 years older than she was, so she's much more confident when she started with us. She also had some key skills around learning revision, which is really, really crucial. But the problems, the cons were about finance, and she was very open about this, and she has been all the way through. She has a series of part-time jobs, which she fits in around what she does. Again, not every student can do this, and I've got to be honest with all of you. You know, some of the students struggle. Some of our graduates do struggle with trying to generate income whilst doing the medical degree. It's very difficult. We have, and many universities do have, programs for students that they can help out and get paid for work. And we have this program, which is a digital student ambassadors and digital ambassadors, and they work on campus, and they get, usually if they're working for a day, they get about £100. So that helps as well. Emma also said about utilizing summer holidays, particularly in years 1 and 2 of the medical degree, is really good. You can actually earn quite a lot then. So there are things you can do. I think one of the biggest things that she realized that is a problem for graduate entrance is, yes, you have friends of yours who have done a degree and they've gone off now. And one of the things she realized is many of her friends now are working, they're buying houses, they're having holidays, and she's not. But as she said, the driver for her is a career. She knows she's on a career path that she wants to do, and that for her is a massive, massive driver. The other thing for Emma as well, she's slightly older, so really realistically she can and she will be able to apply for additional funds. But one of the key things that she has done all the way through is have a spreadsheet about her funding, so she knows exactly how much money she needs to raise to be able to fund herself. And I think these are really good insights, and I think these are kind of things that you need to feed back to your students, particularly at that point of which maybe they're feeling pretty bad about not getting their A-level grades. There are alternative routes into medicine. They're not necessarily easy, and as both Gordon and Mandy have said, you know, there are lots of things to think about around this point. So in terms of sort of my final comments for you, I think at the point of students not getting in, not having offers, not making the grades into medicine, what are the alternatives? As Gordon mentioned, if you're close, reapplication, but you've got to think about that carefully. What's been so have you chosen the right universities to go to? Do you need to rethink that, or do you want to reapply to those universities again and think about how you can do that? If you've missed by a long way, is that the end of the world? No, it's not. The graduate route, if medicine is what you want to do, but I think it's that decision and that discussion with those students. Actually, is medicine what you want to do? It's a long process. Other alternative professions, and there are many alternative professions in that healthcare arena that maybe would be better suited for you. And I've touched on a few today, but there are lots out there, and actually both NHS, MSc have lots of information around these professions, and it's useful for you to be aware of them. I'm sure many of you are, but also to guide and advise your students around that. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We are just over our hour that we scheduled this meeting for, which is absolutely fine, because I think we've had some absolutely brilliant presentations, and I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you, Mandy, Gordon and Tim, because you've put a lot of effort into that, and I don't think you'll get a better, more comprehensive view from admissions deans anywhere else. They've been really honest and open with you today, and I think really helpful. I'm just going to see if we have a couple of questions. We've just got thanks, which is really lovely. It's really nice to hear that people have enjoyed that session. I've found it interesting. I actually didn't know that there was a difference between accredited and non-accredited biomedical courses, so I've learned something. So every day is a learning day. So I'm going to finish for today. And again, a huge thank you. We are going to cut this webinar. It finishes quite quickly. But before we do press that button, just thank you again. I think that's been brilliant today.